Does being a Christian make a difference in your life? I think most of us at Epiphany will say yes, it does make a difference. I know it makes a difference in my life, and hearing your stories and knowing you, well, it sounds like it makes a difference in your life too. So if it makes a difference, why is it that our faith, our tradition, our relationship with God takes a back seat to so much of the rest of our lives? Relationship with God, like any relationship we have, requires time and energy and work. We Episcopalians are probably the most non-offensive Christians out there. We are very private about our faith, so private about the difference it makes in our lives, and so respectful of the spiritual lives of others, that we are often reticent to share our stories, what our faith means to us, what it means to live and love with God, knowing that we are loved by God. I have just returned from spending 10 days at Camp Stevens, which is our diocesan church camp located in Julian, sort of near San Diego. And I've been working there as a chaplain every summer since I have been ordained. Usually I go the first week of August. But this year I was invited to come and be part of their counselor training program. The 10-day session trained young people ages 16 to 18 or so in the art and technique of being a camp counselor. I was stunned, though not really surprised, by the sophistication of the program. Everything from homesickness to conflict management to stages of group development and more were taught to these kids in a way that was fun and easy to understand. It was impressive, to say the least. One thing in particular that I noticed about the counselor training program was the emphasis on spiritual development and growth. This is one of Camp Stevens' goals, and they articulate it in such a way that it makes clear that while this is a Christian camp, the spiritual development aspect of the camp experience is not limited to a Christian experience. In other words, it's an open enough experience that those who choose, no matter what their faith background, if any faith background, can still be supported in their spiritual growth. I've also noticed that my presence, being a priest and representative, if you will, of a Christian institution, does not always go over well with some of the older staff. So I found myself in an interesting position of having to preach the gospel, to talk the God talk, in a way that was not off-putting to a variety of spiritual sensibilities, and that also maintained the integrity of my call as a Christian leader at my own diocese's camp. It was a dilemma. I found a way, thankfully, and the way that I found was by sharing my own story, my own experience of God. I talked to the kids about going to camp when I was young. I talked to them about growing pains and how growing is holy work. It is what God has created us to do, to continually grow. I talked to them about learning about God through observing God's creation, understanding who we are and who God is by looking at the diversity of the world around us. It wasn't easy, and I'm not sure I was all that successful, but it did bring up for me the question, and also for them, and in today's readings, a question for all of us. What difference does it make being Christian? And if it does make a difference, I'm pretty sure we all know that it does, what is it that makes us so afraid to share it? Another way of considering this question is to remember the first time you fell in love. Was this something that you kept quiet, kept hidden, kept private? Or did you tell your friends and family because it was such a great experience you couldn't help but share? The same is true of our faith. Our love of God and God's love for us is not something that is for us alone as individuals. It's always something that is greater than ourselves, that makes a difference to a community of people, not just one person. Interestingly, the counselors in training at Camp Stevens understood this. I asked them one night to define what spirituality is, and their first answer was being connected to something greater than themselves. In today's reading, there is a theme: prophets and what prophets have to say, and who is willing or not willing to hear them. After Jesus is rejected in his own hometown, he gives his disciples specific instructions on how to handle rejection and how to know if they are being received. It's good advice, and it's good advice for us too. I suspect our reticence to share this great love of God in our lives is out of fear of rejection. Maybe not outright rejection, that might be easier, but fear of whispered conversations and judgments made after we share such things with our friends and family. It's a real fear. No one wants to be rejected or judged, nor do we want to be judging others. However, there is a happy medium between two poles here. One pole is the kind of evangelism that makes us all nervous, the kind we see on the news or hear the stories we hear of emotionally manipulative Jesus talk. Evangelism that is a competition to get others saved, to think and believe in a way that is very one-dimensional, maybe a way that we think others should think and believe. And the other pole is most likely where we find ourselves as Episcopalians. This fear of rejection and a privatized experience of faith. Somehow, we need to find the via media, the middle way between these two poles, because truly, our faith is dependent upon it. Being able to share our story, to talk about what a difference it makes to live and love with God, and to know that we are loved by God, is important to our own spiritual growth. I hadn't really put this together before, until this past week when one of these counselors in training asked me for help. Her group had planned an overnight experience that included sort of gathering of their group together at the end of the evening and some sort of spiritual talk at that point of the day. And she had been asked to be the person to give that talk. I asked her what she wanted to talk about, and she told me a story about the difference the love of God made in her life during a very difficult time. And she said, I feel like this is something I should share, not because others need to hear it so much, but because it was so real for me. Speaking about it helps me keep it alive. It helps me to remember. Now that's gospel evangelism. Not only gospel in the sense of good news, but also in the sense of the written text. That is exactly what the Gospels are attempting to do, to speak the truth of the good news of Jesus, of God's love and our lives lived in love with God, so that we can cease our forgetting and remember what is most essential, most central, most important in our lives. The love of God alive in us and alive all around us. This is not something that we ever need to be ashamed of or fear rejection because of. It's something we need to share, something that we need to keep alive. Our faith depends on it. Sharing our lives lived in love with God and knowing that we are loved by God will only deepen and grow that love. Because this kind of love is not for us alone as individuals, but always for others, always seeking to grow and expand and bring others into that same love. I know this kind of evangelism is a challenge for us all, but with God's help, I know that we are up for it.